let's really kind of dig in here and park on this for a second. Do you really think about this, do you really think the people that wrote this in the Bible didn't know that it was crazy? Do you really think they were like second graders? They're just like, yeah, and then this happened, and then this, and yeah, it's just, wow, I can't, oh, it's amazing. You don't think they have the same sense of sophistication as you or I? They do. They did. At any point, don't you think they could have cleaned it up and been like, well, this is a little weird, okay, let's try to make it. They didn't. Because really, there's two options here. Either the people that recorded all this stuff, either they were ignorant of how crazy it seemed, or they just didn't care. It's like when you or I, we have something and we just got to tell people, and we know it's crazy. We say, look, I know this is nuts, but this is what happened. We don't change it because we know what's true is actually stranger than fiction. And that's where these guys are coming from. They're saying, look, we know that there's a level of sophistication and intelligence out there that's going to laugh at all this, but we don't care. I like that. I wish we would be like that. I wish we would stop trying to make everything so flat and two-dimensional and reasonable and logical and just be like, yeah, I know, it's crazy. But here's what happened. Because that's what faith is. Let's go ahead and turn to John chapter 1. John chapter 1 in your Bibles at your seats is found on page 809. And now as you're turning there, John chapter 9 needs a little bit of setup. John was a teenager when Jesus walked the earth. And then when he wrote it down, he was kind of an older man. And he lived in the world, just to reiterate, it's on page 809 in your Bibles at your seats. He lived in a Roman world. You know, Rome kind of ruled the world at that time. But in terms of ideas, it was the Greeks that ruled. Okay, it was called Hellenism. They were probably, I mean, maybe I'm revealing my own bias here, but the Greeks were probably the smartest nation that ever walked this earth. I mean, they were incredible. Hundreds of years before Jesus, they were working out atomic theory. Democritus came up with atoms, okay? Hundreds of years before Jesus, there were people like Anaximander, they were talking about how this bang happened in space and galaxies whirled off from it. I mean, these were very smart people. And John is writing in this environment. He's writing in this Greek environment where he knows at any point they're going to laugh at him. But he doesn't care. And add to that the fact that the way John looks at a specific thing we're going to look at in a second, and the way the Greeks looked at it, he didn't even shy away from that. He didn't even try to translate it. He didn't try to make it make sense. He just let it all hang out in all of its bizarre glory. John chapter 1, okay? In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. So you get it? He's starting off here in John chapter 1. He's saying, look, I'm going to start talking about the Word, which is something they would have been familiar with. Word, or logos, was something that they were very familiar with. And remember, logos means logic. And so he uses their idea for logic, and he talks about Jesus, right? And then he goes on in verse 14. Now check this out. This is huge. In verse 14, he says, so the Word, and remember, the Word was God, became human and made his home among us. Now, this was a Greek no-no. The Greeks never, ever, ever would put God in a human body. The idea of God as like this divine spiritual being and this idea of flesh were so opposite of each other. I don't know, did they sweat a lot? I don't know why they didn't like flesh, okay? But apparently flesh was like, Socrates said, the body is the prison house of the soul. So like spirit and flesh were total opposites. They're like east and west. And so what does John do here? I love it. Look in verse 14. What does he say? Does he apologize? Does he say, I'm going to get you ready for this? Does he say, well, you know, it's kind of like this? No. He actually says in verse 14, so the Word became human. At that moment, every good Greek would have shut the book and been like, this is ridiculous. But John doesn't care. He doesn't care because he knows it's crazy. but he also knows it's what happened. Isn't that cool? In some ways, that's one of the greatest arguments, by not arguing, that it's real. Because he knew he could have cleaned it up and made it seem very logical, but he doesn't. He just lets it all hang out. Paul does the same exact thing. Go ahead and turn over. It's not too far away. It's on page 870. Paul does the same exact thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Now remember, Paul, he's writing a little bit after Jesus had risen again, and some people think maybe between 55, 60 or so, and he's still in that same world of reason and logic, and everybody's so, it's like Mr. Spock, like everybody's got to understand what's going on logically. And he says, look, verse 18 of chapter 1, the message of the cross, that means the truth of Jesus, is foolish to those who are headed for destruction, but we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. So look, he even goes so far as to say, look, it's foolishness to them. We know that. So what? Wouldn't it be great if we could do that? Yeah, so what? You think it's crazy? Yeah, sure it is. I agree. But let's talk about what happened. And that's what Paul does. He says, look, verse 19, as the scriptures say, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. Now, Paul is going back in time. He's going back to Isaiah chapter 29. In Isaiah, we don't have to turn there right now, but in Isaiah, there's this long-standing idea from God that, you know what? I'm not impressed with your human wisdom. I'm not. In fact, he makes this metaphor. He says, look, you guys are like clay. I formed you. I'm the potter. What, are you going to turn and look at me and say, you didn't make me? That's ridiculous. And in fact, he says, I am going to purposely, now listen to this, this is very important. I am going to purposefully frustrate your human wisdom. This is huge. This is a giant concept in the Bible. God purposefully, he doesn't just sidestep logic and reason. He actually works to thwart those people that think they got it all figured out. And he actually wants to couch things in such a way that they seem crazy, that you are going to have to reach out in faith and believe. Because he wants to frustrate the wise and the learned, and he wants to approach the humble and those that have belief or faith. Isn't that interesting? You'll find that ethic all throughout the Old Testament. And Paul uses it here too, verse 20. Don't you love this? Paul's like one of those guys that you would not like to have as a friend, but you're so glad he's on your team. You know what I mean? Like, he's tenacious. Verse 20. So where does this leave the philosophers? There's almost a bit of like bravado in what he's saying. So, hey, philosophers, where are you? The scholars, the world's brilliant debaters, where'd you go? Where are you? God has made the wisdom of the world look foolish. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom, he has used our foolish preaching to save those who what? Believe. And so it comes down to believing. And the theme that keeps running through this, and this makes me just, it fries my circuits. The thing that we keep coming back to in these passages is that God is not impressed with our human wisdom. And so often what we do is we put reason and faith, and we think, well, there's faith, and that requires a lot of faith to embrace, but then there's reason. It's like what's really there. Like, here's reality. Here's what I can see and sense and touch and taste and feel, and here's where faith is. But, it's hard, but I'm going to be a faithful person, but, there's so much fact over there, and there's so much truth, and Paul's actually saying that's not the truth at all. In fact, from an intellectual standpoint, human wisdom is no better than human faith. Because when we really think about this, I think we fall into the same trap too. We put reason up there like it's some sort of big thing, like it's a god almost. And we think, reason, it's like proven. It's like in atoms, and you can see it in the universe. It's like it's the force, right? But think about this with me for a minute. And trust me, if you follow me on this is a lot of fun. You can use this at parties. It's really good.